I'm going to pass it over to you, Michelle.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and put the link to tonight's resources in the chat. I just did that. I'm going to be referring to a lot of these things, so it will be helpful to have it handy. Thank you so much, UX Research and Strategy, for hosting me. As Jen just mentioned, this has been a long time coming. We've been talking about partnering on something since before the pandemic. So I'm thrilled to actually be here tonight and to talk about one of my favorite topics in user research. This is the same link that I just posted in the chat. If anyone wants to take a screenshot of it, you're welcome to do that as well. And for those of you that I haven't had the pleasure of meeting yet, again, my name is Michele Ronsen, and I'm a user research executive, coach, and educator. I teach design and user research to people around the world, and I also conduct research. I've been working with Stripe since August. I tend to have long-term engagements where I'm actually doing research, so my hands are in the weeds, and all of my training and workshops, corporate trainings, consumer workshops, the Ask Like a Pro series, all of that is based on my hands-on learning, crawling through the trenches of some really remarkable organizations and conducting research around the world. Quickly, my background: I come from the design side. I transitioned into research about 10 years ago when I founded Ronson Consulting. And I rebranded my firm right before the pandemic to the name Curiosity Tank, with the explicit purpose to focus more on educating and helping people upscale in the user research industry in order to make more confident decisions and progress in their careers. I've taught thousands of people, also super active on LinkedIn. LinkedIn named me with the Top Voices Award, the first user researcher. So yay for our industry. We're really growing and gaining in awareness. A little context setting for what we're going to talk about tonight. I do offer a user research series called Ask Like a Pro, and that research series is made up of 6 specific workshops that follow a very specific cadence. The Spot Patterns workshop focuses on analysis and synthesis specifically. So what I've done here is extract a bunch of that information. It's actually a 5-hour live workshop with 2 hours of pre-work. So we're going to really try to skinny that down into 1 hour. So what you are going to get here is really just a very top line of some of the very specific topics that the team thought would be most interesting for you, hence the resources, because I'm going to be flying through a lot of this and not able to go deeper in our time frame allotted. So let's lay a little groundwork here in terms of what qualitative analysis and synthesis actually is, and what are some of the tools that we use. So just to, again, establish that framework, analysis and synthesis is where we make sense of all of the information we collect. And we summarize it, we share it, and we act upon what we learned. Specifically, analysis is taking apart the pieces of information in our artifacts and our observations and breaking them down into smaller pieces. And synthesis is where we're combining those snippets of data, as I like to call them, to create something from them, to create themes, to create categories, to look at the data in different ways from different lenses. And analysis and synthesis are closely intertwined. You can't do synthesis without analysis, and analysis actually the next step is synthesis. So they're really closely related. There's 2 ways to gather information. There's listening and there's observing. And the analysis and synthesis that we're doing is a combination of organizing and understanding what we heard and what we observed. So we listen to get at meaning, why, motivation, beliefs, and values. And we observe to get at the how, habits, behaviors, and actions. To maximize our learnings, there are several activities that we can do within our research sessions, whether they're moderated or unmoderated, whether they're in person or whether they're remote. We can do some show me activities, we can do some share activities, some draw activities, fill, sort, plot. all sorts of activities. I love designing activities in my studies. It keeps it really creative for me and my participants and my stakeholders. And it also provides me with different formats of data and different artifacts to then analyze and synthesize and include my final readouts. So the evidence that we collect could come from a variety of different activities. It might be showing me your screen or your cell phone, or show me around your apartment, or what's in your Spotify list, or it could be storytelling, it could be fill in the blanks. A bunch of activities that I just mentioned before, but I bring this up because the evidence that we collect is what we will then analyze and synthesize. And I spend a lot of time in that workshop series focused on note-taking strategies. I am a huge note-taking strategy proponent, and there's lots of different ways that we can take notes to right-size the information that we collect, organize those different artifacts and formats of artifacts to help us expedite our analysis and synthesis. We're not going to spend too much time talking about that today because we're really focused on what happens after that. But know that these things are really, really closely intertwined as well. So your note-taking strategies relate directly to your analysis and synthesis, and your note-taking strategies have the ability, when done correctly, to significantly expedite your analysis and synthesis. So I'm going to give you an example of some note-taking strategies that we talk about in the program, and those include perhaps maybe taking your notes in terms of the stage of the experience that you're looking at, or perhaps according to participant, or maybe it's participant and stage in the experience, or maybe they're about heuristics, or maybe they're about different levels of detail, quotes versus verbatim versus ahas, right? So these frameworks can really provide us with an enormous amount of value. We just have to establish them up front and make sure that all the note takers are using the same exact framework, and we're taking notes in the exact same way, so our data is equal. But we never take notes to find solutions. Instead, we let the insights emerge from the data itself. So here are some quick note-taking method examples. I'm not sharing these tools and templates today because it would just take too long to, walk through them and the ins and the outs of them and how to use them and when and things like that. But know that the rest of our conversation today is based on some sort of assumption that you have a solid note-taking framework in place. And speaking of, frameworks are a terrific way to help you think about not only how to take those notes, but then how to analyze and synthesize. And there is a link to this frameworks tool in the resources that I provided. So frameworks provide you with a very distinct perspective from which to look at your data and organize your data in a variety of ways. So the frameworks that you choose should relate directly to your product decisioning goals and the teams that you're supporting to help make those product decisions with confidence. So lots of different frameworks here. The sheet actually continues on the bottom. It's a little bit cut off, but hopefully this will provide you with more inspiration. And we're going to come back to these frameworks quite a few times today. So some best practices in terms of qualitative analysis and synthesis with your stakeholders. I always suggest that you do your analysis and synthesis with other people on the team for a variety of reasons. And analysis and synthesis is going to be stronger. It's going to be more credible. It's going to be more actionable if you have those other beautiful minds participating. Your engineer is going to think very differently than your writer is going to think very differently than your designer is going to think very differently than your PM. And again, our goal at the end of the day is to move our teams into action. So we want to harness all those beautiful minds and really learn from the things that they see and the perspectives that they share so that we can be in best positioned to actually move into action as quickly and efficiently as possible. So when you're planning those sessions, and I shared with you a sample stakeholder synthesis agenda as well, what you might what you want to do first is make sure that your team is on board with your note-taking strategy before your sessions begin, right? And then you want to choose how to analyze your data before the sessions, right? You want to choose your format, you want to choose your frameworks, you want to choose your strategies, and let them know if they need to take notes live, if we're taking notes during the sessions, if we're taking notes from recordings. All of that should be really buttoned up before you ever say hello to a participant. And I also like to schedule the analysis and synthesis meeting time with my stakeholders far in advance, right? So I'm going to get that on their calendars a couple of weeks in advance. And also really want to make sure that all of the data collected is visible and accessible in one place, because we want to make sure that we're going through that data equally and thoroughly to make sure that we're not introducing any sort of bias, right? Like selection bias. Lots of different considerations there. And establishing a shared vocabulary is also going to be really important and set you up for success. I've included some links to some key terms that have to do with analysis and synthesis, and also a link to the UX lexicon, which is a living, evolving glossary of UX research terms. So feel free to check those out when you have a chance as well. Now I'm going to jump back to frameworks a little bit. So I mentioned frameworks can be used in note-taking, and they can also be used in analysis and synthesis. And choosing specific frameworks will really help you right-size the information that you're actually collecting, as well as expedite your analysis and synthesis portion of the process. So again, here is that same exact framework sheet. I just like to call out, there are spectrums of frameworks that you can use. So for example, in the upper left, we have high tech to low tech, right? There are also opposites, infrequent to frequent, right? Fast or slow, premium or mass market, right? So if you can think about your frameworks in advance, you're going to be in a much better position later on. And again, our goal is to move our teams into action with confidence and quickly. You always want your frameworks to relate specifically to your research goals as well. So maybe goal-specific frameworks might include quick wins versus long-term goals, or top priority versus low priority, or short-term goal versus long-term goal, right? Or a new theme or a recurring theme, or first use versus recurring use. First use would be a NUX, a new user experience. Recurring use would be PUCs, previous user experience. Maybe you're organizing it according to NUX and PUCs. Here's that synthesis agenda. You can expand and contract according to how much time you and your stakeholders have, but this will give you a good format, at least, to facilitate those conversations. So what are we analyzing? This is pretty important to wrap our heads around, because people take notes in all different ways. And when they're taking notes in an analog format, it can look very differently, right? Some people are taking notes on Post-its. Some are using index cards. Some are organizing them into Ziploc bags, right? Some are doing a transcript and then delimiting the transcript and then color coding those. I love the different approaches here. Not only do I think it's gorgeous, but you could see how many different ways we actually think about organizing our data. A lot of academics use really heavy binders and notebooks, right? And no one's right and no one's wrong, but really getting on board with our team in terms of how we're going to do this consistently is pretty key. This is what my desk usually looks like, the one on the left. I'm a Post-it note girl, or at least I really was a Post-it note girl before COVID. Now I'm much more digital, but lots of different ways. And again, we've got to be super on board, and the whole team's got to be taking notes consistently so that we're not introducing any sort of bias, and that the data collected can be equally and thoroughly evaluated. If you look at a lot of those nuances here, like you see the image on the left, now my assumption is that the Post-it note color relates to maybe a participant. The vertical line maybe relates to whether they're a new user or a recurring user, a Nux or a Pux. Like the tabs maybe relate to, let's just say, tier of service that they're with. And then there's many other like indicators in here. We could do all of this in Miro today or in Murally or one of those tools. But again, you got to be super, super in line with your note takers to make sure that you're all taking notes consistently. Highlighting is another way to do it. Maybe you have a different highlight color for, maybe you're doing some empathy mapping, and blue is think, and purple is feel, and orange is say, and yellow is do, and so forth. Ziploc bags, I can't even imagine, but I salute these people for this discipline and organization. I mean, it's a work of art. Mind mapping is something else to consider as well. And here you see it like a combination of the delimited transcripts with the markups. And then look at the one on the right? We've got, the color of the post-it that's, 1/3 the width, right? There's a pin color that stands for something. And they're organized according to a spectrum. I don't know what the spectrum is, but it's beautiful. Okay. So what we're taking notes on should be really well thought out before we begin. And how we take those notes. We just looked at a whole bunch of analog examples. Let's look at some digital examples too, right? Now, there's off-the-shelf frameworks and spreadsheets that I've created, that other people have created. There's debrief grids, there's simple grids, there's rainbow spreadsheets, there's custom spreadsheets, there's color coding for task success, and there are thematic analysis tools that you can do in Excel. I mean, look at this. I'm not like an Excel formula crazy person, but I mean, it's just beautiful, right? I don't know what it stands for, but I would love to get into the mind of whoever created this to understand the gradations of color and the groupings and things like that. Airtable also offers some templates. One of my students, Randy, does all of his chosen method would be Airtable templates. You can also customize Airtable templates. Trello is another tool that you can use for analysis and synthesis. You can pull these cards and the data within those cards, connect them, color code them, label them, duplicate them. It's a really, really fun tool for analysis and synthesis. But all in all, humans are the best pattern recognition machines in the world, right? We have this insane ability to pull out patterns and themes like nobody else on the planet. And our research plans guide us to find these patterns to help us achieve our research goals. And it all ties back to the plan, right? It all ties back to the research plan. We have the ability to recognize and then transform these patterns into concrete, actionable steps. And that's what our teams are looking for from us, right? There's many ways to group the items. There's many ways to approach it. There's many ways to create these patterns. And as individuals, again, I think that everybody has a beautiful mind, right? The more stakeholder diversity we have when we're doing our analysis and synthesis, the more diverse patterns and themes we're going to be able to see, because people see different patterns, right? And this is another reason why we want this to be a group effort, right? We want it to be really collaborative. And then aligning on what we want to learn, right? Which should have been identified in your research plan, right? Helps us align on what data to look for, what patterns to look for in that data. So synthesis helps us find meaning in the patterns that we observe. Those different perspectives or frameworks force us to see the data in new ways, right? Consider how your persona might look at the data. Consider how your mother might look at the data. We do a variety of activities where we're doing some sense making from different perspectives. One of them is, how would a small child interpret this? How would your mother interpret this? How would your target persona interpret this? right? And by creating those different perspectives and lenses, we're seeing things in new ways. Same thing with your developer versus your product manager versus your designer and so forth, right? We want those perspectives. They'll help us make us stronger, okay? So analysis and synthesis is where we make sense of the information that we've gathered, right, in order to summarize, share, and act upon it. So analysis specifically is where we break apart the snippets of data, right, and we explore it. Synthesis is where we combine it together to create the meaning, right? We synthesize or connect the information that relates to one another or doesn't relate to one another. It's totally okay if you're going through one of your frameworks and you find snippets of data that don't belong. That is totally fine. Let's put it in a miscellaneous bucket for now, right? But the process itself is inextricably intertwined and allows us to get where we're looking to go, which is to make more informed product decisions. I'm going to get some water. Feel free to throw some, lots of questions in the chat. Are those questions or introductions? I'm not sure.
We have a few questions, but we might get to them as we go, Michelle. So let's hold off a little bit and see where the talk takes us before we go to the questions.
Great, great. And it looks like another 100 or so people joined since I started. If someone wouldn't mind copying, pasting that resources link for the people to access, that would be great. And we're going to get into thematic analysis. The team thought it would be really helpful to show what this actually looks like step by step. So I actually broke it down for you. So thematic analysis is a multi-step process that's really quick and easy to understand. And we use this to analyze disparate pieces of qualitative data, right? I've used the word snippets a few times. If I have a transcript and my participant says, well, I typically brush my teeth in the kitchen in the morning, but in the bathroom at night, what I might want to do is delimit that text and reduce the size of that text so I have fewer pieces of data to handle. So there's two separate thoughts there, right? And I want to make those into two separate chunks or snippets. Brush his teeth in kitchen for breakfast, brush his teeth in bathroom at night. Okay, so by simply reducing the amount of information, I'm greatly reducing the amount of information I'm going to analyze and synthesize. And then once we delimit the text, then we explore the themes, similarities and differences and relationships to one another. We always want the data to be interpreted from multiple points of view. Then we code that data to help us answer our research questions and find the meaning within. It's super flexible. It can be done remotely. It can be done collaboratively. It can be done in person. And it's really flexible. And I think it's probably sort of the baseline barrier to enter in terms of analysis and synthesis. So I love this quote, right? Analysis involves constant moving back and forth between the entire data set and the coded extracts, right? We're looking really closely at that snippet, and then we're coming back up to look at the big picture. We're looking really closely at the next snippet and then coming back up, right? So this process of really taking that close look and zooming back, close look and zooming back. And we're doing that over and over and over again. So this is what thematic analysis looks like step by step. Okay, so in my cohorts, we collect feedback on every single workshop. We do that for a variety of reasons, but one of the biggest reasons is so we have data to analyze at the end of the cohort in this spot patterns class. So I'm going to walk you through an example of one of the activities that they do. This is an original export of primarily open-ended survey data collected through Survey Gizmo, which is now called Alchemar, right? It's really ugly. It's a spreadsheet. I don't need most of this information. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to scrub that data and I'm going to format it, the real data. Okay, so I removed the names, I removed the, what else did I do? The language, I removed the time date, I removed the, device, the location, all of the stuff that wasn't particularly important. Then I organized the data on each tab. So each question has its own responses. Let's just say there were 7 questions, right? So where you see Q1, those are all the responses for Q1. Where you see Q2, those are all the responses and so forth. The first tab is all the raw data. The second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh tabs are organized and formatted. Now, what the teams do, what the individuals do, is then go in, become familiar with the data, identify, label, and define themes. So we have in column or row, column B, we have a big circle, and that's where they identify and label the themes. Okay, and then we have a big section on top, and that's where they're defining what these themes mean to them, right? And it could be just a short phrase or sentence. Let me show you what this looks like in the next iteration. So what we have here is someone manually writing in what that theme was. So this person wrote in themes that had to do with coaching, content, advice, happy camper, and video course. Okay, nobody's right or wrong. It's just about how you see the themes emerge, right? Now, someone else created drop-down menus. This is the same data, okay? Their themes were upskilling, exploring, foundations, career change, formal, personal reconnection, format. So not only are the core themes different, but their approach to thematic analysis was different. They created these little drop-down menus. So they read through all the data, probably made a note somewhere of what the core themes were, then programmed these drop-down menus. On the right-hand side, you'll see someone who did it in a different way. She used, these wouldn't be called emojis, emoticons. What's the word I'm looking for here? Iconography, let's just sum it up with iconography, and then program those into drop-down menus, right? Now, other people will also use a combination, right? Maybe someone's using manual icons and someone else is creating a sub-theme within there, okay? You could do this in a variety of different ways. You can also do this with colors. If you're thinking about task analysis and task success, how great would it be to do it in color, right? Then you could see at a first glance where all the reds were, where all the greens were, and everything in between. So this is a very, very simple fly through over how to do a thematic content analysis in a spreadsheet and many different approaches. So content analysis is systematic coding, right? We're coding the text and other artifacts. We're breaking them down into manageable snippets. We're organizing them by keywords or phrases. We're creating themes or buckets, right? And then once coded, those become coded categories to then summarize, right? It works really well to identify intentions, focus trends, describe attitudes and behaviors, understand perspectives of different segments, reveal similarities, differences in other patterns, including outliers, and analyze open-ended responses. Now, as I mentioned, there's different types of content analysis and different approaches within them. What I just showed you was content analysis in a spreadsheet and 4 different ways to do it in a spreadsheet, like Google Sheets or Excel, right? Here's some other ways that people approach content and thematic analysis. And thematic analysis can be appropriate when exact precision is not required. I want to be very specific about this. When precision is not required. When precision is required, we want to take a different approach. Okay. Some alternative approaches to content analysis might be to look at the data in terms of frequency or counts. Okay. Are all the snippets or themes equal? Is one theme particularly loud, but it didn't show up as frequently, right? Is one theme particularly quiet, but shows up over and over and over again, right? Which themes are most important, right? Here, we would look at how many times something like a keyword came up. You could do a keyword search, right? You could also look at the frequency of these instances as well. Now, not all themes are equal. Not all feedback is relevant to our research goals, but all feedback should be treated equally. When we're reducing our content into snippets, we want to pay attention to these things, but we can turn qualitative data into quantitative data if we have enough of it. Okay, so 3 of my previous students created tutorials, and there's a link to a Fuel Your Curiosity newsletter that shows you each of their approaches to thematic analysis in 3 different tools. So Randy takes you through a thematic analysis in Airtable. Meo-Shin takes you through a thematic analysis in Dovetail and Miro. And Sam takes you through a thematic analysis in Trello. Does anybody hear a background noise? No?
Yeah, I do, but I'm not sure if it's coming from you.
Oh, me? I don't think it's me. I'm all alone. Well, I hope it isn't too bothersome. There, it just went away like that. But anyway, I encourage you guys to go in. These are really quick. There may be 2 to 3 minute tutorials each, but they really demonstrate not only people's different beautiful minds, but 3 different ways to approach a very similar task, right? And also maybe it will inspire you to try a new approach. Now, affinity mapping is something that I think most of us are familiar with at this point. Affinity mapping is where we're looking for affinities or relationships between our data, and it's often to do with clustering. And this is another type of thematic analysis, right? And we use Miro for specific exercises in the spot patterns class, right? The data has already been separated into snippets. We've uploaded the snippets onto individual Post-it notes, and then we look for the themes and the patterns in those areas, right? Now, affinity diagrams gather and organize data based on natural relationships or affinities. This is an example of raw data from Catherine in my past cohort. I just think this is gorgeous. This is an example of her synthesis, right? But we can go further with this. We can go much further with this, and we can combine those with frameworks. So let's think about taking affinity mapping to the next step. 2x2 frameworks. Earlier, I just mentioned frameworks, right? Could be on a spectrum, but by 2x2 frameworks, I'm talking about an XY axis, right? It allows us to consider and compare the data across relevant spectrums, okay? So again, let's take a look at that frameworks tool. So maybe our relevant spectrum for our current study is high cost, low cost, and positives and negatives. Maybe it's impact, high impact, or low impact versus high effort and low effort, right? When we look at them across spectrums, we can begin to plot the data in even more meaningful ways that our businesses and our stakeholders can act upon. So here are some examples of frameworks, right? Again, it's opposing characteristics on a spectrum. You can use just one axis, or you can use 2 axes. Axis-I, that should be a word. So we plot on a single spectrum across, an x-axis, which would be left to right. And you could do a variety of these, or you can combine them and use an XY axis. I've included my tool on Likert scale response anchors. These are also really great prompts to do this type of spectrum analysis, right? Maybe you want to analyze the data according to acceptability or familiarity or consideration or importance or agreement or probability, right? There's a variety of ways to do this. We want to choose the frameworks that are most pertinent to our business goals and the business decisions we need to make. So here are some examples. I think I just mentioned actually high effort versus low effort. What about combining that with realistic versus aspirational? Or high cost and low cost, and combining that with expected or unexpected? Okay. In terms of prioritization, the impact versus effort is a huge one. And again, you're going to need your stakeholders' input on this, because you're going to need to know and understand how much effort might be involved to do X versus Y, and what that impact or opportunity might be. This shouldn't be done by one person. This should be a really collaborative effort. Other 2x2 frameworks would be product versus market, right? Product fit versus market fit, or new versus current product, current versus new market. Another one might be importance versus urgency. All of these will help you help your teams move faster from insights into action in a credible way that's based in business knowledge and business language. Another example from the cohort is the prioritization matrix and the SWOT analysis. We actually do the prioritization matrix and the SWOT analysis on user research skills, hard skills and soft skills. Okay, but you could do this on, anything. You want to choose your frameworks that relate to your research goals. So these 2x2 frameworks will further ensure your results yield that actionable and meaningful product decisions are made in context, okay? So here are some additional analysis and synthesis methods. I'm going to do a quick time check, and we're great. Mind mapping is something else that you might want to consider, either alone or with your team. It's super fascinating to have your core team create their own mind maps and then compare them. Search log analysis is a terrific way to understand more about a problem space or an opportunity space or a definition or a key term, right? You can also look up, say, user research. How many times was the term user research Googled in San Francisco from 2013 to 2014 by women? I mean, you can go so deep and get so brainy and nerdy with this stuff. Like, this is an entire black hole you can get lost in. Lots of quant people spend a lot of time here, but it's great to substantiate perhaps other information, right? Red light, green light is another approach to thinking about how to organize your information in a different way, right? Does it fit our brand? Does it have consumer appeal? Does it give us a competitive advantage? Is it easy to implement, right? By thinking in these different business ways, we're putting our data and we're looking at our data in more concrete, objective formats that will help us make those decisions with more confidence. Spectrum analysis. This is pretty much the version of a Likert scale, right? Where you're looking at information or data across a spectrum. Another way to really maybe understand your customers' pain points better, or their segmentation, or where their segmentation may break or overlap. Also, a really visual way to share this information, right? And I'm going to end with data triangulation, okay? Triangulating data is where we compare different data sets from different sources, right? I love this quote that apparently Albert Einstein never said, but not everything that can be counted counts, and everything that counts, oh, I'm missing a word, and not everything that counts can be counted, right? This really ties back to that earlier sentiment that all data should be treated equally, but not all data matters. Not all data is going to relate to our research goals at hand. If I'm doing that study about where people are brushing their teeth and I pick up information about when they shower, it's not necessarily relevant to the study I'm doing for Crest toothpaste. Okay. So right sizing that data and being really confident about, what fits in and what data should be collected and analyzed is really helpful. And decision-making requires many, many different inputs, right? We have our own intuition. We have world events. We have our competitors and their landscape. We have resources, right? We also have qualitative and quantitative data and lots of other things like anticipated and unanticipated costs, benefits, maybe policy changes, right? So all of this should be taken into consideration when we're helping our teams make those decisions, right? We want to use our common sense to weigh all of these, right? Our input is one source of input, or two or three, but it's within a context of an ecosystem that should also be considered. So what data can you triangulate? What other sources will help you strengthen your questions, your insights, right? We use triangulation techniques at all stages of the design process. Huge time saver, right? Huge resource saver. And it will really help us clarify and strengthen the scope and solidify the findings. Two of my favorite places to triangulate the data and two of my favorite people inside an organization are the customer service team, and particularly the person who's assigned to the area of the product that I'm working on, and the sales team, right? Both of these people are service-facing people. They're talking to customers and prospects every single day. They have an enormous wealth of knowledge and a shared goal, right? Your customer service person wants to reduce the number of tickets and reduce the amount of complaints. Your salesperson wants to make the product more attractive in order to close more sales. But they have these other beautiful brains that are helping them think in different ways. Find out who those people are and make them your besties, right? Another one is your data analyst, right? This is a quant person with a beautiful brain that can tell you where something happened. Where did they drop off in the flow? How many people hit those FAQs, right? In what order? How many session times does it take for the average person to create a new account? Where are they dropping off in the flow, right? How long are those session times? These people just have beautiful, beautiful minds. Wrap yourselves around them, introduce yourself, and work together. Other sources of data that you can use to triangulate would be secondary and desk research, right? Product reviews, stakeholder interviews, competitive analysis, heuristic evaluations, expert reviews. But those customer-facing people, your CX teams, your sales teams, and your data analysis, data analytics, I can't talk today, they have a wealth of knowledge, right? So both primary and secondary means here. All of this will help you increase the validity of your findings, provide a clear picture of the problem, increase confidence, and create innovative ways to look at the problem differently and understand it, and provide unique answers and results, right? And what I do in my decks is I'm triangulating the data and I am reinforcing where it is substantiated. This pain point is substantiated in the fact that we had X amount of JIRA tickets filed in the month of May 2022 and linked to all of those JIRA tickets. right? This finding right here, or this insight, is also substantiated in this study, right, by XYZ researcher who completed a study looking at something similar, but also found a different theme, right, or a similar theme, I should say, right? Cons is that it can be extremely time consuming, right? And you're also looking at more data. You're looking at a collection which requires some greater planning and organization. And you're not always going to know what data to triangulate until you complete that first cut of that analysis and synthesis. But if you're using a note-taking framework, you'll be able to do it in real time. You'll be able to identify in real time during that session what you might want to triangulate. And you can contact your PM, you can contact support, you can contact your salesperson or your analyst and say, do we have any data that supports this? Right? So get them thinking, get them working, right? Build those collaboration skills to help identify these things simultaneously. Now, insights into action, right? This is our goal at the end of the day, right? Our ultimate goal is to move our teams and partners from insights into action. It's nails on a blackboard to me when people confuse a finding and an insight. So I just want to take a moment here to clarify. Findings are required in order to identify an insight. Your findings are those snippets of information that you observed, that you heard, or that you saw or witnessed during your sessions. They include the artifacts, the behaviors, the attitudes, right? The quotes, the screenshots, the fill in the blanks, right? You report on findings that relate to your research goals directly. And findings always come before insights, always. You can't have an insight without first collecting your findings. Now, once we've collected the findings, we analyze and synthesize the data to uncover insights, which are interpretations of those findings, right? These terms should not be used interchangeably. I can tell immediately how savvy you are by how you use your key terms, which is one of the reasons and the impetus for creating the UX lexicon, right? So insights often answer the question, what does this mean? Or why does this matter, right? It may conflict with something earlier, right? Or something outside of the study, but they provide a fresh perspective. They provide a hidden truth, an unarticulated aha moment. A yes, that's it, right? They speak to our audience and they're memorable. Moving from findings to insights is a far more advanced practitioner skill set, and it takes years to really hone these skills. And you're not always going to have insights, and that's totally okay, right? Not every study is going to yield insights. I could teach a whole class on insights and findings. Here is a quick insights checklist. You probably have an insight if you can answer yes to at least, I would say there's 7 things here, at least 5 of them. If you can't answer yes to 5 of these questions, what you're looking at is a finding. Findings are critical, but I really would like to hammer home the difference between an insight and a finding. Okay, so insights are super sought after because they provide the biggest impact. Impacting the product or service we're working on is our ultimate goal, right? That's why we do what we do. So how do we help make actual informed product decisions? Marry your analysis approach and frameworks. I should actually correct this slide to say, marry your note-taking frameworks analysis to the product decisions to be made. Okay. Are you looking to identify benefits, costs, risks, and mitigations? Are you looking for a go forward, no go forward? Are you looking for a who, what, where, when, why? Are you looking for an MVP? What are we looking for, right? And use the data and organize the data in the frameworks that make the most sense. And remember, the people who need to consume and act upon our research are our users too. I always think of my studies as having at least 2 segments of people, of the people that we're designing for, which might be customers or prospects. And then we have the people that need to consume our data, or stakeholders. Those are the people that need to act on it. They need to act on the learnings in order for us to be successful. So think about the UX that you're providing your stakeholders, right? Think about how to present your data in business terms and formats that are going to be meaningful and relevant to them. Think about how to organize your data by function, by priority, and confidence level. And do this in collaboration with your stakeholders. Because the more bought in they are to your data, your recommendations, your output, the more likely they are to act upon the learnings. And to manage your own expectations, this stuff totally takes practice. And it's super fun and it's super geeky. And you're going to find new ways and new frameworks to practice over time. And usually the same frameworks aren't going to be appropriate for more than one study. So it's creative to even come up with the right frameworks that would be most meaningful and relevant to your study. So I leave you with one thought, and that's to do the best you can until you know better. And then when you know better, you'll do better. And I hope that this inspired you to think about alternative analysis approaches and to try things some different ways, different tools, different formats, different platforms, different perspectives. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Michele.
You're
Let's
welcome.
give her virtual applause or go to your reactions and hit applause. Now is your
Thank you.
chance, getting lots of love in the chat as well.
Wow.
Now is your chance to start to put your questions in the chat. We have a few already there, Michele, so I'm going to go with some of the questions that our team pulled. First one, how do you collaborate with stakeholders or other UX researchers to do synthesis or analysis asynchronously?
So that process is going to start for me in the planning stage. And in the research plan, I'm going to identify who on the team is going to play what role and who has what experience. So that will be identified very early on in the process. And let's just say for the purposes of like the current study I'm working on, I do most of my collaboration directly with my PM, my product manager, and it's 2 of us. And we work very, very closely together. And in that planning process, we've worked together a bunch. So we're very comfortable with how we work together and know what to expect. But I will, suggest a note-taking framework and a specific template that I'll create. Usually what happens is after the first 2 or 3 sessions, we can do this via Slack now because we know each other pretty well. We'll just kind of banter about some big broad themes that we think are coming up. And we're also going to talk about things that haven't come up, right? I'm going to look at my assumptions and my hypotheses, and I'm going to extract some like broad themes that I'm seeing and ask her to do the same. Oftentimes there's overlap, and oftentimes we see different things, but it's also equally as important to identify what we're not seeing or what we're not hearing. And then as we move through the analysis and synthesis phase, it often depends on what that final artifact will be. Am I producing, a 10-page single space top line report, or am I producing like a mini museum or a multiple page presentation deck with highlight reels and key quotes? And that will inform some of that too. Other times I'm having a full-on workshop with, 5 or 6 members of the team. In those cases, it's super important that they're familiar with the base data first, because you can't analyze and synthesize data that you're not familiar with. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. So, at one point, Michelle, you mentioned themes being quiet and loud. Could you elaborate on a little bit about what that means?
Yeah, so just finished a study for a healthcare provider in the cohort. The last presentation was actually yesterday. And there were very specific themes that the researchers were looking for based on their research goals and their assumptions and hypotheses that were developed in collaboration with the stakeholders. There were other themes that bubbled up to the top that we weren't looking for or didn't tie to our research goals. One of them was, it was about this particular study that was presented yesterday was about finding care, right? It was about finding doctors and finding locations on desktop and mobile for this provider. Two themes came up that were totally unexpected and quiet, but consistent. One was that it's not just about finding care, it's about finding the right care right now. So if you're looking for urgent care, it's about finding urgent care now because it's freaking urgent, right? If it's about finding an oncology specialist for your mother who only speaks Spanish and is, limited in mobility, that is an entirely different journey that requires different thought processes, different considerations, different tools, insurance information and knowledge, copay, distance, right? So there's a very big spectrum that exists and we weren't looking for. So finding the right care was a really quiet theme, but turned out to be very loud. Is that a good example?
Yeah, thanks for that. So, there's a question here. You talked about scrubbing. Is the analysis included in that scrubbing?
I scrubbed the data to remove information that wasn't pertinent to what I would be analyzing and synthesizing. So I think that was in relationship to me exporting the feedback after each workshop. And in the export, there's a lot of data that's included with that. So for example, the names of the people that provided the feedback is irrelevant to me. The time, the device, their longitude, their latitude, perhaps the question sets were I don't know, maybe 2 sentences long. Please describe your key takeaway about this, and this, or that, and that. I would delimit that text so that I could just see the header. I know what the question is, right? But I want to reduce the cognitive load of what I'm actually looking at. I'm going to take out things like I think and I when this happened, it made me feel excited, right? I'm going to take out when this happened, I feel, and I'm going to leave in excited. I'm going to reduce the amount of information to down to its bare bits. Now, I'm always tracking where that information is coming from because I kept my raw data. So when I'm looking to create my highlight reel or I'm looking to, get a key quote, I always have that source data to go back to. But in my analysis and synthesis stage, it's not as noisy.
Okay, thanks for that. So what's your point of view, Michelle, on reusing data from different, like other previous research?
Assuming the research was done well and it's credible, I think it has the potential to reduce a tremendous amount of rework, better inform your research goals, help you right size the right questions to ask, or how to recruit or not to recruit, or what questions not to ask, or tools and information, or platforms used, or report out formats. Tons to learn from other researchers. In fact, that was one of the biggest takeaways in our wrap-up call yesterday, was how much the researchers learned from the other researchers, not only in how they think, but in how they approach their work and their ability to triangulate the data from study to study. So I think that assuming it's done well, right, there's a big assumption there, huge upside. Yeah.
Okay. So is content analysis different from thematic analysis?
So that's an interesting question. When we're talking about content, content doesn't have to be words. Content can be patterns, content can be sounds, content can be imagery, right? Now, thematic analysis is where we're looking for themes. We can also look for themes in those other things, right? Think about when you go into Home Depot. I just did this a couple of weeks ago with my 8-year-old, and I'm at like the doorbell area, and picture all the different doorbell sounds you have. Okay. So there's doorbells that are like spooky, and then there's doorbells that are happy, and then there's doorbells that are like dun, 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 dun. Think of it, right? So you can do analysis on those things too. So I don't use the terms in a cut and dry way, but I would like to inspire you to think about content as not always having to be literal. It doesn't always have to be words. Right? If you think about Netflix, okay, think about how you sort for a Netflix piece of content, right? Are you sorting by age appropriateness? Are you sorting by genre, like documentaries versus family friendly versus how-to videos versus new releases, right? Think about content in that way too, and how you can analyze it, in that way.
Okay. Another follow-up on the content, sorry, thematic analysis. One person asked, is it easier to conduct thematic analysis directly after note taking, or do you tackle content analysis later after note taking and affinity diagrams, for example?
I think it's going to depend. First of all, you have to finish your note taking first, right? You want to collect all of your findings. But if you're using a framework, you can be doing them simultaneously, right? So picture, if you will, that we're doing that study for Crest toothpaste, and we're looking at how people brush their teeth, where they brush their teeth, what kind of toothbrushes they use or don't use, what they like about it, where they buy it, etc. Maybe the frameworks that we're using are new information versus recurring information. Like, what are we hearing for the first time versus what's new? Okay. So it'd be easy to identify that information in real time, right? Or maybe we're looking for information because our number one hypothesis, this is a really bad example, is that people who live in urban areas have different behaviors when it comes to oral care than people who live in suburban areas. So maybe we also want to organize that content according to urban and suburban. Okay, so if we can think ahead and be strategic, we can be right sizing that information as it's being documented.
All right, great. So, can you think of shares with us some pros and cons, perhaps, of sharing the raw data with the stakeholders?
Yeah, I don't really share raw data with stakeholders because I find that there's so much noise in there, and it's so much like the cognitive load. It's just overwhelming. It's not helpful. There's no benefit to that. But they often ask for it, I think, because they just want it. I think it's more of like it just feels good to have it. But I don't think they look at it for more than 30 seconds before they start like, holy shit, this is like, I don't need this. This is overwhelming.
So you find that you will provide it if they ask,
Sure.
but then
I'm
they
gonna
get
I'm gonna
overwhelmed.
scrub it. I'm gonna remove all the PII. I'm gonna remove all the personally identifiable information from it. But yeah, I mean, it's their data. They paid for the study. Yeah, but nobody does anything with it. It's
Right.
like, yeah, it's like taking a kid to Costco. It's just like,
Oh, I love it. So you mentioned personal information. How do you decide what kinds of data to collect or not to collect when you're thinking about privacy?
that's a great, we could probably do an entire event on that. Let's think about, let's cut this down into like a bite-sized chunk. There's certain things that we want to remove at all costs, right? Like name and let's say we're doing a study for a financial institution and we're asking people to log into their account and show me how you would set up or switch from paper bills to online bills, right? And in that process, I'm actually looking at their account, right? So anything that could be damaging to them, anything that could be traced back to them, certainly their names from any sort of highlight reels or key quotes. I'm going to come up with a pretty consistent system. I usually use P1, P2, P3 for participant 1, participant 2, participant 3. Any sort of healthcare data or anything related to HIPAA compliance, driver's license, height, weight, social security number. I mean, I typically am not doing studies where I'm collecting that level of information, but we have an ethical responsibility to protect our participants, and we take it very, very, very strongly. We're required to. And so,
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah, makes sense.
Mhm.
So, when it comes to identifying themes when you're doing thematic analysis, how many notes do you need before you can group them as a theme?
Mm.
Is there like a general rule?
I wouldn't say it's the quantity of notes, but for evaluative studies, we're typically looking to speak with at least 4 people in each segment in order to 4 to 5 people in each segment. You can should be able to identify 80% of the problems or the opportunities. For evaluative research, I mean, for generative research, we typically want to talk to 8 to 10 people per segment, because it takes, we're not as sure about what we're looking for yet, right? That's a great example of, you want to let the data emerge, right? Whereas in evaluative research, we have a good idea of what we're evaluating. We're trying to find out, like, how easy or difficult is it to do X or Y, or is this do our customers or prospects interpret this as intended? We're looking for something more specific, more defined. So I wouldn't say it's like you need 1 page of notes or 5 pages of notes. It's more about the segmentation and then the relationship between how many people in your segments and the type of study that you're doing. That being said, if you don't find patterns in the first 8 to, first of all, in the first 3 to 4 people you're speaking with, regardless of study, one of 2 things has probably happened. You're either asking the wrong questions or you're asking the wrong people. You should be able to identify some themes within the first 3 or 4 people you speak with.
Even in generative research?
It might be looser, right? Generative, maybe 5 or 6 max. But if you're not seeing themes, halfway through, even like an inkling of a theme, you're probably asking the wrong people or you're asking the wrong questions.
And what would make those questions the wrong questions?
Yeah. So maybe you're testing the wrong hypothesis. Here's an example. I was working for a real estate tech company, and one of the hypotheses that we built the entire study and prototype and everything around was that people want to be able to find new homes more quickly. They want to be able to understand what's available to them in their buying range, schedule an open house, attend it, meet with a mortgage broker, like, quickly. They want speed was important. This was a transactional activity that people wanted to do faster. And that was the underlying impetus to develop this new experience that I was testing. And within the first 3 or 4 people, we didn't see any of that. And I'll never forget this. Like, I won't even forget, like, the couch that I was sitting on. Like, I couldn't sleep. I was nauseous. This never happened to me before. And I'm banging my head, like, how could this has never happened? What's going on? What's different about this study? And I poured through my plan. I read my plan 100 times. And then it occurred to me that maybe we didn't have the right hypothesis, that the transaction was as important and speed really was important. So I went to the stakeholders the next day and I said, we're not seeing any themes. I'm really concerned about this. The only thing I can think of is that we have pinned this entire experience on this one assumption. And what if that assumption isn't correct? I'd like, to deviate from the discussion guide and ask a few pre-questions to get at this. And they were like, sure. And one of my first questions was, when you're looking at the app, where are you? Like, describe your environment. And people said they're on the bus, they're waiting in line, they're on Zoom calls, they're killing time, they're browsing. It's kind of like shopping on Etsy, right? So as I dove into these, it became much clearer that this wasn't a transactional experience for the people that we were speaking with. This was a shopping experience. They didn't want it any faster. They actually enjoyed the process. I like looking at bathroom designs. I have a very small bathroom and I'm looking for ways to improve how I could, increase the efficiency of it. So I like looking at all these houses, or I'm looking for inspiration to blah, blah, blah. Or I've always wanted to move to this area. I know I can't because I have a kid in school, but I'd like to keep tabs on that. So.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I'm going to wrap up with one more question, Michele, because I don't want to keep all of us all night. And we do have some networking afterwards. You're welcome to stay. But before we go into the networking, could you talk a little bit about the timing, about like the time frames for these different frameworks that you talked about and these different analysis methods? Like, how long do they take? And I know it depends, right? But like, could you give us some idea of like how long the analysis takes?
That is largely going to depend on how much data we have and what level of confidence that we're looking for. Anywhere from 1 to 3 weeks. I would say I typically don't go past 3 weeks. There were some comments in the chat about not feeling comfortable taking notes in a live environment, in a live session. I'm quickly just going to put my LinkedIn in here. Please connect with me.
Yeah.
Here it is. I find it incredibly difficult to take notes while moderating research sessions. I'll think of follow-up or probing questions on the fly, and if I'm too focused on note-taking, I can't do that. I strongly recommend that you, no, I'm not talking to the person that wrote that comment, but that any practitioner really develops solid interviewing skills where they can easily, consistently, reliably capture the information they need in a live setting before ever trying any sort of live note taking. Focus on building that foundational skill first. You're going to need that throughout your entire career as a researcher. You can practice note-taking strategies from recordings. You can also practice note-taking strategies in real time by helping other researchers. So tons of ways to do this. Do not clutter your mind with trying to do it all at once. The number one thing you can do is to build your foundations, build your confidence to collect that information reliably, with confidence, in a culturally relevant manner, for sure.
Great. I do have one more question for you because I really think this is good. How do you kind of work through the plan with your stakeholders and keep them engaged and get them excited and get them, not to feel like you're wasting their time. Like, you do the research and come back to us. How do you get them on board and participating in the plan and the analysis as well?
Mhm. I teach a whole class on this called plan. What works for me really well is two things. One is flattery. You know, you know way more about the product, the market, the opportunities, the challenges, the adjacencies than I will. That's not my job at this point, and I need you to succeed. This research will be more successful with your beautiful mind and all of your earthly knowledge about this topic. I want to make sure it's successful for you. And what success looks like for you, dear PM, is going to be different than my dev. It's going to be different than my content strategist. It's going to be different from my designer. So I really want to appeal to their beautiful minds. I want to harness that. I want to learn from it. A, we're reducing the rework. B, so I can make sure it's as efficient and effective, as possible. Second, most of my clients are using Google Docs. And when I'm building my plan, I build in prompts in my plan. I never spend more than 2 hours in the first plan, by the way, the 2-hour draft for sure. Bang it out. It's not going to be super pretty, but I'm going to build my questions in that document. And I'll say, here's a first draft of the plan. I understand the research goals to be 1, 2, or 3. Bobby, are these in the right order? Tag, highlight. Sarah, is there a better way to word this? Or how do I describe this segmentation in a clearer way to someone who's not, as familiar? Comment, tag. Like, I'm literally pulling them in the document. I'm asking them the questions in the document, and they're going to stay there until it's resolved. So sometimes I'll offer to meet with them and walk through my questions. Other times I'm just going to share the doc. Other times I'll copy and paste the questions in the Slack channel. Well, I'm going to do whatever is going to be culturally relevant, but I'm physically getting them in my document from day one.
The good old apprentice and apprentice approach. Yeah.
Help me help you.
Right.
Our success is intrinsic to one another. I cannot be successful, or let me rephrase that. I won't be nearly as successful conducting a study in a vacuum than I will be in collaboration. The number one difference between my most successful studies and those that aren't are the level of stakeholder collaboration and engagement throughout the process, because it builds that credibility, it builds that trust, it builds that buy-in, and it builds that interest in the outcome.
Yeah, I love it. Well, again, thank you so much, Michele. I learned a ton tonight. I don't know about everybody else. I'm sure you did too, but a huge applause and thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. We're going to, let me share my screen. I'm going to record this. Oh, start the recording again because people like this part. This is where we have you raise your hand in an orderly queue and ask questions of everyone's here who's here, and anyone is free to answer. Not just Jen. I'm sure we've heard enough of her croaky voice this evening. So, who's got some questions for anybody here? Raise your hand if you've got one. All right, Sarah, I see you. Why don't you come off of mute and ask your question?
Yeah, so I was just wondering, my background is in academia and more kind of applied assistive technology research for dyslexia. So as a career after grad school, I'm trying to break into UX research, and I'm realizing I need to repackage my experiences, because some of them are more UX-y, but I'm like having a hard time with it because I don't know necessarily how to do it, and also where that line is from very, what counts as user experience research and what doesn't, or I don't know. I mean, I tested products and, and things like that, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I can think of one resource, Sarah. We just had a meetup. When was that? Last week, 2 weeks ago? And it talked about how to package your resume. And I know that Amy did a deep dive into what to include in an academia to UX research. transitioning type of resume. That is on our YouTube channel. I don't have the link handy right now.
You're right. That was very helpful. And that made me aware of what I didn't know.
Okay.
So I'm trying to execute that actually right now. And in that execution, I'm still like, oh, okay. How do I do this?
Anybody have any feedback? Anybody else transition from academia? Do you have a specific question, or I guess you'd probably need somebody to kind of go one-on-one with your resume and give you tips on what they would recommend.
I have something to ask. Like, it depends where you're applying, of course, but if you're applying more to corporate areas, something that I've seen with a lot of the academia applicants, it's that sometimes there's not enough information around like their knowledge with, insights. I mean, research to insights, like what does it mean for the business? Because oftentimes we see that it's very clear and apparent that they know the research methods, but sometimes it's not very apparent the translation, like the actual carry on, what it means for the business world. So that's something like I see that it's missing. So I will recommend to make that a little bit more apparent if it's not. But yeah, that's something that I've seen with applicants.
Yeah, I'd like to second that. I think, I've been in the business world for a long time. And the one thing I was thinking through the presentation is this is all great for a research perspective, but an a type A personality CEO is going to look at that for the first 2 minutes. Their eyes are going to glaze over. And the whole, I think, concept of UX research right now, especially in corporate, is kind of I think it's still very trendy. It's like understanding that a gym membership is awesome, but they don't know what to do to translate that from going into, they just think you go into the gym and you come out looking amazing. There's a lot of work you have to put in to do that. And they want the result of that. And so they see that like, hey, look at all these other unicorn companies that are awesome. They have UX research. Therefore, I want UX research. And so you do have to, plan to be dealing with those types of mindsets.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, that was good advice.
All right. Danielle, looks like you have a question.
Hi, yeah, that was really well said, because right now, so I'm new to UX and I'm transitioning from graphic design. I have a freelance business and I'm just trying to bring more UX into the current clients that I have, and totally type A. Like I was working on a proposal for this guy because he said literally, just give me something that I can say yes to, and that's it. Like that's kind of all he wants. So I'm working on this proposal, and my question is, since I'm so new, like I can think of all these things that I want to do for him and write it all down, and I'm kind of like trying to cram it into a 6-month window. And then I'm just wondering, like, what do you guys normally do? Do you come in, consult, and leave, or do you come in, consult, switch topics, and then do another proposal, and then another proposal? Or like, how does it go? Like, do you wait for them to come to you with like a problem or a question? Or is it like basically, does anybody have any freelance experience working with a client versus like being on staff?
I work at consulting. It's not necessarily freelance, but I guess I'm not sure if it's.
That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Okay. I will say it depends, but then something that a new concept that I got into when it comes to business is managing up. Essentially, I just gave up trying to persuade and become a facilitator of those decisions. So I know they're like, yes, you did the research, but give me something to act on. So usually my deliverable decks are like 10% storytelling, like 30% it's like, chunking, like visualizing what it means and how it impacts the product. And then like the other 20%, it's like recommendations. And then the other time it's us discussing and talking about what are the next steps. What are what they can expect from me. It's more like imagine like a big broad scale synthesis. So I think I just spend less time sometimes in analyzing, but more synthesizing with them until they get the process. And once they are luxuriating on the user research, then they want more. So you just kind of have to hook them. So those decks are oftentimes more action based and what it means for their product rather than storytelling sometimes. But then again, it depends on the stakeholder. But right now, the type of person I'm thinking of is someone who just wants action and wants to move forward. So that's managing now, just facilitating those conversations and recommending. But yeah, yes.
I'd find out too if they already have some kind of a tool to give them the what, like a Google Analytics or a Hotjar or something like that, because a lot of them probably already know what their problem is and they want you to solve that. And so if they already know the what, then you can dive into the why and then just focus on answering that. Even if you know there's probably some other reason, you can just answer that for them.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, this particular person just wants increased sales. Like that's it. So I don't know if they do know the what.
Yeah, without having the context around that, there could be a lot of ways that could be approached, honestly, that's what every company seems to want is increase in sales, but there's a lot of ways to approach how to do that. Yeah.
You might need to break it down into benchmarks, like what does sales means to you? And then break it into benchmarks, like it could be engagement. Does that bring the sales? It could be that the problem is that people don't know how to use the product. So you just need to kind of find what does it mean when it comes to sales.
Mm-hmm. And then if you were a consultant, would you then take each one of those problems and treat it as a separate project?
That also depends. Yeah, so I'm happy to schedule a one-on-one time.
Yeah,
if you
actually,
like
let's do that. I'm gonna reach out to you. That sounds awesome.
Okay.
I love it. Excellent. Thank you. Thanks, Karen. Agnes, you have a question?
I do. In the first question you asked if people are researchers, designers, or they do strategy. How do you do strategy without research? Like, how are they separate is one question. That's something I've been struggling with. The other thing, a recurring question I have in interviews is, tell me about a strategic research. So it seems like they are intertwined, but they are also like separate roles. And that's something I could not resolve.
Yeah, that's a good question. I have one perspective in that when we formed this group, UX Research and Strategy, I reached out to Lori and Lauren and I said, I want to form a meetup group for UX research. And they're like, well, yeah, okay, cool. But strategy as well, because strategy, there's a strategy that goes into research and research informs strategy. So they are complementary. They are hand in hand. But you bet a strategy can be done without research and it happens all the time. Is it a good one? Don't know. But you get a lot of like feature driven, I want this, like the salespeople say, put this in here, or we want to just look at Microsoft Word and how that ribbon has just bloated, right? Like put these features in, these features in. That's a strategy. Is it informed on research? Maybe, maybe not. So I think there's a lot of product strategy that isn't not informed on research. And I've been there at companies where that is the case, or they reject the research and move forward with the strategy that they have in mind anyways. So it definitely can happen.
All right.
Anthony?
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
Agnes,
you.
I would say when people ask you about strategic research, I think what they're generally asking you is, tell me about research you've done that's informed what we should build, not how we should build it.
Okay.
That is, anytime you're up at that level of defining what should go on the product roadmap or what the product should be, that's strategic. You're getting ahead of the PM so that they're not just coming to you with, here's a feature we're going to build, right?
Yeah, so it can be informing the roadmap. It can be informing features, whether to move forward with them or not. I think, is that what you're saying, Anthony?
Yeah, it could be informing, it could be looking at the problem space, informing who should we be building for, or what should we be building? Where should we be taking our product or our business for growth?
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Thanks. Maureen, looks like you have your hand up.
Yeah, just to second what Anthony was saying, we at my current company, we recently had 2 brand new UX strategist positions that I don't know exactly how it metamorphosed itself, but we had 2 UX managers who didn't want to be managers anymore. They were like UX designer managers, and they are now the UX strategists, and I'm working closely with them. And one of the questions I had for my manager was, okay, what's the difference between what I do, like the UX as the sole UX researcher at the time, and what the UX strategists do? And just like what Anthony was saying, is they're helping with the roadmap, helping identify gaps, helping identify cases where if the company has questions that we don't know the answers to, and then the ideal goal is that then they would loop me and the research team in to get answers to those. And that's kind of the way we're separating out the research and then the strategy, let alone the design piece, because there was definitely some questions when the strategist positions were first created. We all were like, well, wait a minute, how is that distinct from what we're doing? Like, what do we do? How do we not step on each other's toes? And that's kind of how we identify.
But ideally, you work closely together, like a strategist works closely together with a researcher.
Yeah, and in fact, our collective manager asked me to have a bi-weekly meeting with the 2 strategists to talk about these things that they come up with. They identify gaps and figure out ways they could solve problems to help the roadmap move forward and the way the business needs to move forward. And then they'll work with me to identify, okay, we have all these questions. What kind of research should we do to get answers to these? But it's still early days. It's only been 6 months that we had these new strategist positions. So, but it's working out so far so good. It's just we're very understaffed. That's the only thing.
Thank you.
Yeah, hopefully that was helpful.
Yeah, it was very much.
Thanks, Maureen. Karen, looks like you took your hand.
Yeah. Oh, yes. I
Go ahead.
want to add to that. I also think that research and strategy really depends at the maturity level where your product is at, because that's going to shape the type of methodology that the researcher is going to recommend. So if it's an early product, usually what I've seen, it's that people go for more like user-based, more qualitative methods. That's where they're going to be conducting pilot tests, prototypes. That's when it's early on. But when the maturity level is a little bit bigger, that's when you get into more like sophisticated methods with quantitative research. So that strategy is always existing throughout the whole product life, but it really depends on how much depth you're gonna get into depending on its maturity. So I think just something that I wanted to ask. So thank you for listening.
Yeah. Anyone else have any questions? Last call. All right, Sarah, one more question.
One more. Is there any like office hour? Like, or should I just put my LinkedIn info to ask for like a one-on-ones with some of the more experienced industry people, or like, is there a way to do that? I know there's like UX coffee hours, but those seem to be pretty booked.
Yeah, I don't know of any specific UX, and that's something we've been actually requested, but just haven't had the capacity to meet. We do have a UX research and strategy Slack community, and maybe if you reach out to somebody there, they might want to connect with you and have some one-on-one conversations. There's loads of people who have put their LinkedIn contact information in the chat, and we'll be posting the chat on the website as well after the event. But as far as us having any formal like coffee, hours or coffee chat or whatnot, we don't have anything structured at this point.
Okay, cool. Thanks. I thought I would just ask.
Sure. Yeah, no problem.
Sarah, if you sign up for the Slack channel and get on there, there'll be plenty of people that want to brain jam with you, so no problem.
Cool. All right. Anybody else have any last minute burning questions?
I just want to say UX people tend to be good people who help each other.
That's true. Good peeps for sure. All right. Well,
Well,
everybody,
then
thank you.
That's a group I want to be part of.
Yes, exactly. See all the love, all the hearts. I love it. Well, thank you so much for hanging on till the last hurrah through happy hour, and appreciate you all attending this evening's event or whatever time it is. And we'll see you 24 hours of UX starts in a few hours. There's an opportunity to see a lot of speakers there, or we'll see you at the next event, which is July networking. All right. Have a good evening. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.